Hey, Dr. Elliot. So this is Chris Whitaker. I'm on the phone with Dr. Lawrence Elliot. Dr. Elliot, thank you so much for agreeing to let me interview you.
Sure.
Go ahead and start by letting us know. I think I want to start here. What were some of your early experiences with racism in America?
I think my earliest time was around 1964, 65. We had a lot of folks coming through teaching us how to uh, work with white people and how to react around them
Mm,
to keep ourselves from being hurt too bad and put in jail too often.
mm-hmm,
But the whole purpose was to try to integrate some of the establishments in the town that I grew up in, which is Somerville, South Carolina.
mm-hmm.
They had two places particularly targeted. One was a drugstore that had a food counter in it called Kramer Drugstore, Craimer, I think it is. But it was a drugstore, a pharmacy with a small cafeteria area in it. And it was nice little booths, but we weren't allowed to sit in them. And the other place was a place called Tasty Freeze. It's much like a Dairy Queen, but we weren't allowed in the dining area at all. There was a little window on the back of the building, and we'd go tap on the window and place our order, and then they would give us our food through that window. And we wanted to have an equal seat.
Mm-hmm.
And so there was a movie that came on about the folks in Greensboro and how they were trained not to react to being called names and being threatened. And that was not easy to do.
Mm.
The idea was to send enough people to occupy every chair in the establishment so that if they were to serve anybody, it would have to be us.
Mm.
And I remember when we were going into Kramer Drugstore, we went in, I think it was only about 16 seats. It was a small area. So it was 16 of us that went in, and there was another 16 waiting in case the police came and took us out, which is actually what happened. We occupied all the seats, and we were called names and threatened quite a bit. Okay. And finally, we were physically removed by the police. Then the second 16 went in and occupied all of the seats while we were being taken to jail.
Wow.
And the thing is, we were never actually charged.
Mm-hmm.
We were just arrested. And that went on until, I guess it was about a week later, because we'd been there every day. And every few hours, we would occupy every seat. And we went there, I guess this was on the fourth or fifth day, and the owner had removed all of the benches.
Wow.
And he said if he had to serve blacks, then he would rather shut down, which is what he did.
Wow.
With Tasty Freeze, it was a little different. We did the same thing, walked in, occupied all of the seats, and the police, I didn't realize we had so many police in Somerville at that time, but it just dragged us out. We would get locked up, and we were only locked up for a few hours, but very few of us actually got hurt, but a few of us did get hurt pretty bad.
Mm-hmm.
Then while we were being released, the second group would be Tasty Freeze occupying all of this. They decided to go ahead and serve us because they saw that we were going to be persistent enough that we would not give up, and they were not going to make any sales. And it's a profit-generated business, so they decided to give in to us.
Mm-hmm.
And they simply asked us not to take up every seat. And so what they did initially is when we would come in, they had a waitress that would seat us, and she would seat us in whatever area we wanted to be seated in. And then they would confine us to that area and then sit the white people on the opposite side so that we were as far apart as possible.
Okay, so I want to ask you a question. I know that there were some organizations that oftentimes organized these sit-ins, like the SNCC, things like that. Did you ever work with any of those kinds of organizations, or were this more kind of a you and your friends kind of thing?
No, this was organized through the NAACP.
Oh, okay, so it was professionally organized.
Yes, yes, it was.
Mm-hmm.
And they made the contacts through the churches, and the trainings that we had to go through before we could do any sit-ins was organized by the NAACP
Mm-hmm.
at the churches, and we had training sessions, and we had several hours of training sessions before we stepped foot into any of the restaurants or tried to do anything in any of the establishments.
Wow.
They did not want us to anger these people and start a riot,
Mm-hmm.
which is what would have happened if they hadn't trained us on how not to react. Mm-hmm. And I think that was the only thing that really kept us from being hurt. Some of us were hurt, but fortunately I was not one of them. But I've seen some people that were, beaten pretty badly,
Mm-hmm.
Only because they started to talk back. Mm-hmm. And once you talk back or say something that they didn't like, they would start beating on you. Mm-hmm. And it really wasn't very much that you could do.
So I'm curious. You've seen in your lifetime, and simply just in those years of you being involved with those sit-ins, you've seen progress towards justice and getting rid of discrimination. I'm very curious to know your perspective of how we're progressing today in terms of police brutality, mass incarceration, and just the other forms of discrimination and racism that still exist today. What are your thoughts on that?
The brutality that we see today is the same as it was when I was a kid. Mm-hmm. We just didn't have cell phones to report it.
Wow.
But I lost a few classmates. Wow. And it was always under very suspicious circumstances, but they were dating Caucasians. Mm-hmm. And they turned up mysteriously dead. Mm-hmm. Or if they, I have a friend, he was dating the sheriff's daughter. When the sheriff found out that his daughter was dating a black man, it was called rape. Mm-hmm. And his body was found on a railroad track where a train had run over him. And the only word that we got as a community was that the coroner reported that his alcohol level was so high that he apparently fell asleep on the railroad track and the train ran over him. Wow. Wow. And we all knew that didn't make any sense. And I had a few friends that were drowned who were good swimmers. Because they either angered someone or dated someone's daughter. And those kind of things happened quite a bit. But we did not have any way of recording it or reporting it to any higher authorities than the people who were the perpetrators. Mm-hmm. And so that was, for us, was one of the most frustrating things that we have ever experienced, because there were crimes being committed against us that we were not able to do anything about. So in terms of what I see different, the only difference is now it's being recorded by cell phones or other devices, and it's being made public. Yeah. And that's the only difference.
That's powerful. Was there ever a time that you felt like what you were doing was in vain?
Sure. Mm. I felt that way until Tasty Freeze decided to go ahead and integrate. Mm. And when they did that, the Kramer drugstore, which closed their food counter to keep us out, I felt that we were losing ground there. But when Tasty Freeze integrated, I felt we had gained some ground. And then we started working on other things. It was about a 3-year project that we were working on, getting different stores to hire blacks in positions other than janitors. Mm-hmm. being able to eat at any restaurant and just walk in and sit down at any table. Mm-hmm. And even simply going to the courthouse and drinking from any of the fountains. Mm-hmm. There were fountains labeled white and colored. And we had to drink from the colored fountain but it was a kind of a bad looking fountain. It was, the rusted old fountains, and the white fountains were nice and clean, and they were kept nice. Right. And so we didn't drink from the colored fountain at all. Mm-hmm. We just didn't drink. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't until we decided to drink from the white fountain that we ran into a few problems. There was no integrated swimming pool. There was one public pool, and it was a white pool only. And when we decided that we were going to integrate that, we went there, and they didn't stop us. But we jumped in the water. The lifeguards told everybody to get out of the water, and they closed the pool. The next day, a bulldozer came and filled in the pool with dirt, and to this day, it never reopened. It was a struggle, and one thing I see with the young people today is that they don't acknowledge the struggle that we had to go through to allow them some of the just freedoms that they take so much for granted.
I hear that. Mm-hmm.
And there were people who were beaten badly just so they could walk into a restaurant and sit down at any table. And just disregard that. It's really discouraging for me, because I also recognize that I'm in the last generation of those who fought.
That's right.
For that. And we're getting old. But those that are in my age group that I've talked to all feel the same way, that the younger folks today just don't appreciate the pain that people had to suffer for them to be able to just do what they do everyday things.
Now you are, and I hope you don't mind me saying this, you are a mental health doctor. You've had your own practice. Your wife is a pediatrician. You have a daughter that's a pediatrician, another son that's a lawyer. So obviously, in relationship to the story that you're sharing with us right now, your family has come a really, really long ways. Do you ever have moments where you're able to walk into whatever restaurant that you want to and you reflect on how far you've come? Or do you ever have moments where you get emotional, kind of comparing what we've been through and what you've been through versus where you all are now?
Often I do. Mm-hmm. Usually something will trigger that. I'll be in a restaurant, I'll just go into a restaurant, and I'll hear a conversation from someone else that just sparks a memory of something I was not able to do. And I guess I get a little melancholy sometimes about it, but I will think about what we've gone through. And again, it's just a word or a sentence or a phrase or something I will hear that reminds me of what I went through as a kid. And now I'm able to sit at a restaurant, in any restaurant, and even refuse service if I don't like the service I get. Mm-hmm. I didn't have that as an option when we were first integrating these restaurants. The only good thing is that most of the cooks were black.
Okay.
And so we knew that they would not do anything to our food.
Yeah, okay.
That was the only safe thing that the only safe reason that we had to continue to eat there. Mm-hmm.
Oh man, you've been through a lot. you were the right person to interview. I've gotten plenty. You've given me a lot. I really appreciate you taking the time to do this. Thank you so much for everything that you shared, and thank you sincerely for everything that you've done to advance the cause of civil rights. The things that, like you said, that my generation and below me and even above me many of us have taken for granted. I really appreciate your service too. I don't think we had the chance to say this, but you were in the military, right? If I'm not mistaken.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, I was.
So thank you for your military service. Thank you for your service here on the home front, and really appreciate everything that you do, man.
Oh, certainly, I appreciate it.